screen. Yeah. So, okay. So about me, I am having around 10 years experience in the field of cloud computing and IT infrastructure automation, which includes DevOps and many other tools. Personally, I work as a consultant also, along with my journal work. I used to train many corporate level companies on training with DevOps and AWS, and also few of the trainings I supported for VMware also. So in coming to AWS, in these many years, I have hosted many websites, built partially a front end of them also using React. And also I have hosted many streaming platforms, which are similar to YouTube and Netflix, but in a different category. And I'm a corporate level instructor also. I have certified with 3-level certifications in AWS. And coming to this course, unlike any other courses you find online or in any other institute, where they will provide the course in such a way you might be preparing in some examination or certification. But in my course, the point of view will be mostly practical one. The course will completely oriented on the project level, so that at the end of this course, you can appear for interviews, you can keep experience from 4 to 5 years like that on AWS, because I will be covering all the issues I have solved in my career in this course duration. And also, it doesn't mean I'm not covering certifications. With this knowledge of working experience, you can just follow some basic links and you can clear the certifications also. And coming to the certifications, if you are going to some abroad like European countries or American countries or Australia, in those places, they might give value for certification as an added advantage. But in India, people won't consider much about certification. They mostly value the experience and all. So coming to the AWS certifications, we have these level of, so this is a graphic image I have grabbed from AWS website itself. It's like you will be having 3 different paths. The first certification will be the cloud practitioner. This one will be mostly done by people who just want to showcase a basic level of knowledge on AWS, like a 6 months experience guy or 8 to 9 1 year experience guy, or the people from sales department or from pre-sales department of our support team who just want to showcase it to the end customers, end users, or the business developers on they just have an high level overview on AWS. So this cloud practitioner certification is for that one, them. And in the next level, this is common from both this architect or operations or developer. So next, coming to the first level of certification, it is called associate level. This is for 1 year experience, guys, 1 and above. So here we will be having 3 different streams. Architect level is for persons, it doesn't mean you need to be a software architect, but this is the first level to complete that one. Here in architect level, the concepts will be covered mainly, the exam concepts will be provisioned mainly on the high level overview of on the concepts. Like it's similar to cloud practitioner, but thing is in architecture, they will mainly consider scenario based questions about how a particular application will be hosted, what are the services you will be doing, considering in the background, how multiple services are linked together. That kind of level of picture will be seen in the associate level architecture. And coming to operations, this one will be considered mainly for the people. Once the architecture is designed, AWS is hosted, and project is running, you might run into production issues, and there will be a set of administrators who will be managing the AWS. Those are called as AWS administrator. So your work will be at an initial level of 2 to 3 years or 4 to 5 years experience. Considering a certification of SysOps administrator is the best option. And coming to the developer, this is from the point of view of a developer who want to build an API or host his application and how to link it with the services of AWS, like database services or the SNS messaging service, and how these integrations happen and how it is linked with the API. Those kind of level of questions will be asked in the developer. So if you want to work as a developer who will be hosting using AWS environment as your hosting environment, then you can choose this developer certification. Either you use developer certification or SysOps administrator. The next level of certification will be DevOps engineer. So this is in this DevOps engineer professional course certification, the main concepts appearing in the exams will be the tools related to DevOps, like code pipeline, code commit. So these kind of tools will be mainly utilized in the DevOps environment. Those particular tools are highly concentrated in this exam. And solution architect is next level to this architect role. So I am holding this AWS certified solution architect professional. I have completed this around 2.5 years back. I think it's already expired because the certification validity will be changed for every 2 years. I need to reappear for the exam again. I will do it within 2-3 months later. Present. Okay. So far, any doubts in this certification, guys?
No.
Just to clear it out. Any okay. So let me explain you the contents of the course first. Then I will go dive into the first class directly. So this is the course brochure provided by the institute, and they will be supporting 3 different certifications. As I mentioned you, this is the AWS Certified Solution Architect, the first level of examination, this branch. And as part of this course, once you complete this course, you can appear for any of these 2 things, solution architect or systems administrator. DevOps engineer, I won't be concentrating because that is linked completely to the DevOps course. And if you want the course linked to this one, I will be explaining I will be taking another course called DevOps along with this AWS administrator course. There I will be concentrating mostly on the different tools of DevOps ecosystem and AWS related code commit, code exec. These things also will be covered there in more detail. It doesn't mean I won't cover here. They will be covered in a 1 or 2 sessions here. There, as you are having already knowledge on DevOps ecosystem, you will know how to utilize these services also. See, from an administrator point of view of AWS administrator, you will be spinning up these services or hosting these services. But using these services will be done by the DevOps engineers. Understood? So you will understand more in the DevOps course. Okay. And coming to this course contents, there is no prerequisite, just a basic computer knowledge is enough. If you miss anything, so you can just post me in the comments. I can refer you to the other documentation links, or I will explain in more detail about the basics also. So coming to this course, in this today's session, I will be covering this first session on what is the introduction to this cloud computing and what are the different types of cloud environments and how it is linked to AWS and what your work will be in case of that one, all those. And Linux essentials, okay, this one mostly I will cover in the second session only, not even in the third session. And EC2 is a service where you will be spinning up your virtual machines directly. So that is called as Elastic Cloud Compute Cloud Service, where you will create a mission and you can directly access that one using remote desktop or SSH if it is Linux, and you can start using that one. I will show you how to use that one, how to back up those machines, how to create images from that one, how to attach volumes to that one and all in the next class. Elastic Load Balancer is useful when you're hosting websites. And when you are hosting websites, you will be having multiple copies in a different servers running. So based on the throughput or number of people accessing the website, you need to spin up multiple servers and to divide the traffic. Let's say if 10 users are simultaneously accessing the application, you need to divide the traffic to 50-50 to both the servers. So that kind of traffic management is taken care by Elastic Load Balancer. I will show you what are the different types of load balancers and how to deploy them and how to link with our services. CloudWatch is a monitoring service provided directly by AWS. So here you can link what are the services you want to monitor so that they will cost extra billing for monitoring those services. In case of any issues in the production, you can check these monitoring logs whether the service is running correctly or not, any issues with that one and all. Other than CloudWatch, you can link your own monitoring solutions also on the AWS, on the EC2 instances or any Kubernetes instances. Examples like that will be Logic Monitor, Prometheus, Nagios. All these are linked to DevOps. I will show you a basic introduction of Prometheus also along with this CloudWatch. So what is the advantage of using Prometheus over CloudWatch is you will be having full access to and granular level control using Prometheus, and you will be billed only for that machine hosted where this Prometheus is hosted. That is one advantage. Another advantage, but what is the advantage of using CloudWatch is the bill will be less, but the granularity will be more there. But here you need to use the services provided by the AWS only. And as this complete service is hosted by AWS, they will bill you based on the number of services you are being monitored and the number of logs being generated, how much storage is being used, how much frequency of you are monitoring for hourly basis or minute by minute basis or second by second basis or weekly basis and all. In that way, the billing will be different here. The easiness of using will be less, more easier when you are using CloudWatch, but the billing will be at the granular level when you are using Prometheus. Did you get the point what I am telling between what the differences? Guys? Or any doubt in that one?
No.
Okay. So coming to the simple notification service, this is a development concept mostly where you will be integrating with email functionality, SMS, and also service registrations between multiple microservices. It's like creating a communication between your AWS services and your applications hosted in between them. So RDS is a relational database service. So when you want a database like Oracle or MySQL, database is just a, for non-technical guys that I'm telling is database is just a software where you can save all your data and you can just fetch all your data in a simple query language like SQL. So that database, if you want to, so whichever data, like whether you're a portfolio management or any banking website or anything, finally your data will be stored in the database only. So you need to be very careful about database. So to host your own database, one option is to spin up an EC2 instance. In that one, you install your software, you apply your license. Let's say Oracle database. That is one option. Another option is to use the RDS service. In RDS service, you will just mention as you need an Oracle database and what is the RAM and configuration, all this we need to provide for this database. The installation part will be taken care by AWS only. You will just provide the configuration details. They'll spin up an instance and they will just provide you one endpoint to connect to the database directly. The headache part will be taken care by them. Understood. So the same way, the difference between Prometheus and CloudWatch, the same way here also, when you install yourself, you will be having complete access control. But when you install with RDS, you'll be having a admin rights only, but not that granular level. Understood. So based on the requirement, you can take any of those two. So auto scaling is similar to this. When you are having multiple servers deployed as part of your solution, based on the traffic, along with the load balancer is just a front end, it will just distribute the traffic. But in the auto scaling, it will increase the number of servers also. If the traffic is more, let's say, just few days back, 2-3 days back, there is a big offers in Amazon. So the number of customers accessing that portal will be definitely more than 20 times by the normal time. In that case, they need extra servers to handle the request. So when they configured in auto scaling group, based on the number of requests or the traffic coming to the website, automatically number of servers will be increased, spinned up, and the request will be handled. Once after these 2-3 days, when the traffic is less, they will scale it back, like they will decrease the number of servers by syncing everything in the database again. S3 is a storage service. So it's like OneDrive in Microsoft, Google Drive in Google, where you will be uploading your files. Along with S3, there is another storage level also that is called as Glacier, and other services, storage Glacier. What is the difference is Glacier is generally for RQ data, means a data which you won't retrieve it back regularly. S3 is for regular data, like you'll be hosting your files or websites and all, and there will be continuous user who will be fetching these files. But Glacier is similar to S3, but you won't be fetching the data frequently. You will just use it for backup and storage purpose. And whenever hardly some 6 months or 1 year time, at that time you used to retrieve the data. Here the data retrieval will be with a lesser speed. Along with that, the billing also will be less. Here the cost will be more and the speed also will be more. So if you are hosting a data which is frequently being accessed, then you should go for S3. If you are just using for backup purpose, like when you are just creating a backup of your complete cluster and you just need some storage to save it for future purpose, in that case, Glacier is better. Identity and access management. IAM is so once you create your service in AWS, there will be multiple users and multiple team members from your development team or testing team or sales team and all. You don't want to provide everyone the admin level access to all your members. So in that case, to manage what are the services to be distributed to each and every user, we will be using this identity access management. This will be our second session, I think, to complete that. After we discuss about this VPC, I will tell about. So So here they have mentioned 15th chapter is the VPC, but I will start explaining about VPC first. So it will be more easier for you how the network is completely managed, and then we will go to the other sessions. So this will be our second chapter, virtual private cloud. So what is VPC mean? You will be provided an account in AWS, and they had already provided you a separate set of data for you. Like if I'm created one AWS account, and if you created another AWS account, your data and my data will be completely different. They're completely restricted one, so that one user won't access the another user's data. That is fine. But let's say you have created a corporate account, and you will be holding multiple projects under your team. You will be managing multiple teams, and you want to use the same account between multiple customers. In that case, what you can do is you can segregate or create multiple environments in the same account, so that one, let's say, so that one account won't have access to another account, and even in the background, so that they are completely visualized as two different accounts again, so that the data will be secure for both the accounts. So that can be managed with virtual private cloud. So here internally, you are creating a separate cloud environment for different teams or different projects. So let's say I'm working in TCS, and I will be managing AWS services for State Bank of India and also HDFC Bank. So I will be hosting both the projects in the AWS only. But to segregate the data, to restrict the data of SBI being accessed by HDFC or HDFC being accessed by SBI, what I will do is I will create two VPCs for each of them, complete virtual private cloud, so that each project will be having a different VPC. It means a separate environment completely, so that one project won't have access to the another project. And coming to what is this VPC peering is, let's say I'm working in S-Bank, a project for S-Bank. Recently, there is an information that S-Bank is being taken care by State Bank of India. Okay, let's say both of the projects are being handled by me. But initially, as these two are two different projects, what I have done is I have kept two separate VPCs for State Bank of India and for Yes Bank. So now, as both are coming to the same projects, same company, as they are merged, so State Bank of India management team, they should have access to the Yes Bank, and they don't want to create a new user credentials again to access that one. So in that case, what we will do is we will create a peering correction between two VPCs, so that one VPC can have access to another VPC. If we create a peering connection between them, so one VPC can have access to the another VPC. That too, in the granular level, we can provide access, like what are the data need to be accessed. We don't simply give complete control also. We will mention what exact details also there. And cloud. So any doubt in that one, VPC peering and VPC?
No.
So, okay. Because that is an important concept, and yeah, I understood you might be having some 30 to 40% of a clear idea what I have told, but remaining 70% will be cleared out when we practically show you that how that VPC works.
Yes.
Yeah. And cloud formation, let's say cloud formation is a template structure provided by AWS, where when you are doing a repetitive tasks related to configuration, let's say I want to host a website for YouTube, not YouTube, let's say some website like PhonePe, or not even PhonePe. Let's say our own Amazon, the shopping cart services. So if for a startup, not like Amazon, where the multiple thousands of clusters will be involved, let's say we want to create a shopping website for a simple startup. They approached us. So our development team, they have created a product for them, let's say in some React and Node.js as a backend, and they have created the website. So that website they want to host in AWS. So when they approach us, what we will do is we will manually configure everything. We will spin up the cluster for hosting that website. We will be creating a Linux machine. In that Linux machine in EC2, later we will configure all the softwares. And once it is configured, what we will do is we will install the product there. Let's say some 1,000 steps, and at the end of a month or 1.5 months, our configuration is completely done and the product is working. Understood. So now after 1 month, if they want to create one more copy of the same for a different project, then we need to start the same process again and again from start, because all these configurations we have done manual. Instead of that, what is the option provided by AWS is this cloud formation, called as cloud formation templates. This is a structure similar to YAML and JSON. Variably, you can switch between JSON format or YAML format. I'll show you the structure. It's not that programming oriented. It's a basic structure you will understand. How did you understand XML and other things. So in the similar way, you can see that one. The structure will be like this. If you open Google Bookmarks, JSON format of cloud formation. Yeah, the structure will be like this. Example, we'll provide all the resources in a single file. Like we will tell us we need an EC2 instance like that, and we need some volume with 200 IOPS and the test key name, like what is the SSH key, we need to link that. So whatever the configurations we want to do, we'll mention everything in that CloudFormation template, and we'll just deploy that CloudFormation template directly. So in the background, AWS will read these configurations, and they are having this CloudFormation service internally. That CloudFormation service will read all the data with the template we provided and spin up all the EC2 instances or the databases or the linkage between them. Everything will be configured directly in the CloudFormation. So in the near future, if you want to support another product, you can simply utilize the same template by changing the configuration details. And even let's say in the same project, if they want to upgrade the versions, like let's say when you're using RDS version 12, they want some version 20 now. You don't need to uninstall that and install it manually. You can just simply update in the CloudFormation template and deploy it directly. The upgradation process will be taken care by the CloudFormation. Understood? Trust me, this language is not that complex. It's only a configuration language. It doesn't involve any programming in this one. You don't have any complex for loops and object-oriented concepts in this one. It's just a basic configuration management language.
Okay.
Yeah. And AWS CLI. So one option to access AWS is by logging into their AWS console website. And in the website UI, you will be doing all the configurations in the website that will be taken. Another option is to install a command line utility, either on your Windows or Linux machines, that is called AWS CLI. And in browser, if you want to create a machine, you'll simply go to EC2 section and click on create instance. Here, what you will do is you will simply run the command AWS EC2 create the machine name, like that, the syntax. It will directly create that. So when you want to link your application with the different automations, let's say I'm using a Jenkins, a separate tool for DevOps, for build management. At the end of the build, from the Jenkins itself, I want to spin up a virtual machine on AWS. In that case, Jenkins is a software, right? It doesn't know how to access the website and all. So in those cases, we'll be using the CLIs or APIs. So for automation purpose, we mostly use this AWS CLI. I will show you this one also in the second class. I will in the next class, I will create an EC2 instance, both from Amazon portal and also from the CLI. And the same can be created with CloudFormation also. That one I will show you when we go to this AWS CloudFormation section. See, for simple spin configurations, you can use the CLI. For complex configurations where a full stack of stack is involved, you can include a CloudFormation. And one more thing I forgot. Yeah, Elastic Beanstalk. Elastic Beanstalk is a service provided by AWS where you will be where the repetitive stacks, like say for Node.js, or let's say for PHP, when you want to deploy PHP applications, the settings involved is you need a machine, a Linux or Windows machine. Once this machine is installed, you need to install a database, either MySQL or Postgres. These are most frequently used for PHP as these are free, or some other database, whichever you want. And after that, you need to install the PHP server. Then you need to host your application. and do the linkage also. And then you need to create a load balancer if multiple servers are involved in the Linux as a front end to manage that, and etc. Many other configurations. So in such cases, these are the most common things. So every hosting projects generally go with these 5 steps. So if you are following the same approach of generic statements, what you can do is, instead of manually triggering all these things or even creating your own template in CloudFormation, they are providing us some ready-made templates, AWS people, that is called as Elastic Beanstalk, where while configuring that one, we'll just mention what is the kind of application, whether it is a PHP or Node.js or like that, and it will give us the structure directly. What are the things it is going to deploy, and minor configurations we can do, and we can simply click deploy, and all these configurations will be done directly with this Elastic Beanstalk. You can consider Elastic Beanstalk as a ready-made templates provided by them instead of creating your own. Understood? But if your environment involves multiple load balancers with this Elastic Beanstalk is for simple hosting. But when your product is very complex, which is involving multiple microservices and interlinkage between them, and separate monitoring service triggering with that one, then you need to go for a manual approach instead of Elastic Beanstalk. Okay, I will explain you that also, gateways and all. So far, any doubt? This is not complete also. There are some other services which are recently included in the AWS portal. I'm just doing a research on that one. So if that is useful to you, then I will add those also to the course within this 30 days or 45 days of course time. When the time permits, I will include them also. So, but overall, this is the basic concepts we will be covering in the course. If you miss anything, or if you need extra more to a specific service which you are expecting on your resume, you can check me back. If it is required and if it is that important, we will include that also. But mostly the institute people covered all the services here. So any doubts so far, guys? Hello?
No.
Okay, so let's go to the PPT. So let me start with the base, because as management guys are also there, I will start from the basics onwards. So other technical guys, just ignore me for a few minutes or 2-3 slides. Okay, so generally how the websites work. It's like this is your laptop, you can consider it as, and you will be connecting to an internet to access any website. Once you are connected to internet, so when you type any website like google.com or youtube.com, that request will be sent to the internet service provider. That internet service provider related servers will forward that request to nearby DNS zones, where it's like a registry, a named registries, where they will check for google.com address, main address, because internally the server will be having an IP address in a numeric format. Not a, that google.com is just a logical entry to that one. When you type google.com, and the DNS servers will look for that google.com entries in the nearby DNS zones, and they will fetch the related IP address for that google.com and send that request to the main google.com server using that IP address. And once that IP address is fetched, that page will be deployed back to your client, and here that web page will be deployed. This is the basic structure of any website. Let's say nslookup google.com. You see, so when I type google.com nslookup, this is the backtrack happening. I'm using this Excel broadband in my home connection. That request is being sent to its own server, and from that server, that is sent to some other name server that is not fetched here. but as multiple persons will be hosting that using that google.com, that cache location might be there in his server also. So immediately that registered server address will be sent to me. So this is the google.com server. So instead of typing google.com, if you directly type this IP address also, it will access that website. In the background, the request is being sent to this IP address only. Understood? So what I meant to say is internet is in the middle. So whenever you want a website, simply that request will be sent to the server and you will send it back. So let's go and see what is the server contains. So a server is generally a huge computer. You can consider it as a similar to your laptop, but with a more CPU and RAM than using for regular purpose, and with more storage so that it can manage multiple customers at the same time. And internally that server might be connected to its own databases and it owns, let's say that server is hosted in some Hyderabad network in some Google office. Their own network will be there, their own routers, switches and everything will be there. Their database servers will be there and all. So this is the server. So coming to the terminologies for the networking. So now let's say whenever you take a broadband connection, either you are the sole person using that one, or you will be keeping a router inside your home. That internet connection will be provided to the router, and that router will be managed by a router switch. Now it is internally coming directly, and multiple clients will be there. Servers, so that this is vice versa. Actually, you can consider it as multiple servers, a single client, or a single server, multiple clients. So router is, it's the part of router is it's just exchange the traffics or split the traffics between multiple clients or servers. That is the thing. And coming to the traditional. So if you just hosted a website, if it is a small website, you can simply host your website on your laptop also. As it is connected to the internet, you can simply create NAT rules and so that whenever, and you can simply take a domain name from DNS services, let's say some uday.com or like that. And once you purchase the domain name, in the domain registries, I will mention my public IP address. Whenever you take an internet connection, one public IP address will be given to you. That IP address I will register there. So whichever request coming to uday.com, that will be transferred to this laptop directly. So for a simple startup, for a simple education website or a thing where the number of customers is less, you can start like this. But once the customers are more and the business has grown, you need to shift from your home, the PC, to an office with more cooling systems involved. And even as it is maintaining the data and all, you will be keeping your server in a separate server room with all the AC boxes and everything set up, so that for every 1 hour the coolings will be enabled, and they try to maintain that cluster is cooled every time. It won't go to any disaster and all. So that is data center. So let's say present I'm able to provide services to 1,000 customers, let's say for my clothing website. So that one I'm maintaining in a data center in my office. Suddenly, due to offers and all, so more the customers are increased to 10 times more. From 1,000, it reached 10,000 now. So in this time, the data center server which it is running can't manage all the traffic. The server will be down and or it will be very slow. To manage them, what I need to do is I need to create one more server, or I need to purchase a different server, or I need to separately spin up a complete new data center office, and I need to create my network connections between both the offices, and need to manage the load balancers between both of them. That is so much operation is involved. Understood? I need to recruit new network administrators to manage the new servers. and new watchmen, the maintenance people, and servants, the pantry, and everything. It's like creating a new branch again. So the operational cost is more there. So let's say after this Dasara or anything, again the customers might come back to only the 1,000 customers again. Just for the sake of 1 or 2 months, unnecessarily it is waste of my money to spin up one more data center. So this is the drawbacks left with traditional approach. Coming to so what are the problems in that one? So the main thing is rent and the cost and the management of this one. And every time to scale that one, to add the hardware, I need to buy new hardware every time. Once if the old servers are also done, then I need to manage the disaster backup recovery and all. Everything it is not to be maintained by them. Separate team is required just to maintain this infrastructure. So instead of focusing on the product, I end up time being spent mostly on managing the infrastructure. Understood. So to reduce all these things, what I can do is instead of creating my own data centers, I can simply rent the servers from AWS directly. So that I will be paid only for the servers which I have taken them in the hourly basis or the daily basis or for long term like 6 months or 1 year. So once the project is completed or anything, I can simply stop using those services. There is no loss for AWS people also because they will send these resources to some other customer by just scrapping up everything. So in cloud computing approach, I just need to maintain a small office and I need to have a connection. My complete data center is in the cloud now. Cloud in the sense in some different servers. I don't need to maintain the data center. So that is the advantage of using cloud computing. And I have told you the advantage of using cloud computing at the organization level. Now let me show you what is the use of what are the other advantages of using cloud computing. The first thing is pay as you go. So whenever there is a demand of more customers or more traffic, you can simply spin up more servers and pay for that period of time. And whenever you don't need, you can simply close the deal with them and you can get back to minimum servers. The network maintenance, monitoring, the cooling of the servers, all that headache will be taken care by the Amazon Web Services. So other than Amazon Web Services, let's see what are the regular services you use daily in the cloud-based products. Let's say your Gmail. Gmail is one kind of email cloud service where all your emails will be stored. Understood? There is no infrastructure there. You don't need to maintain any infrastructure to manage your mail servers and all. You can simply take the public email from them, or you can take, or if you're having a firm, you can simply take a create a register your company with the Gmail also. In that case, they will provide you @yourcompany.com in the Gmail services, and you need to pay for that one. Dropbox is similar to Google Drive, RS3 in AWS. Netflix originally they used to host their videos and everything on AWS only. And now they are spinning up their own servers as the demand. And coming to the models of cloud. So far, any doubt, guys?
No, sir.
Okay. So coming to the clouds, there are 3 different types. One is private cloud. What is private cloud is you are having your organization, and let's say you are using the projects related to some military grade or some high efficient secret agents of government and all. In that case, the data should be very secure. You cannot trust some AWS also. So in that case, what they will do is they don't much affect about this cost and all. So what they will do is they will create their own private cloud like OpenStack, Rackspace. These are the services. If you are having a data center, you can simply install this OpenStack software and link your VMware vSphere servers and ESXi servers or your data or Hyper-V servers to that OpenStack, so that they will provide you a different portal like AWS. Like how you are creating EC2 instance on AWS, similarly, you can create an instance in OpenStack also, OpenStack portal also. So, but here the software is installed on your servers. The servers and everything will be managed by you only, maintained by you only. So that completely specific to your organization. So whenever you approach any OpenStack consultant, he will just come there with his team. He will set up all the servers, and he will install the OpenStack software. He will create user account credentials for you, and he will leave. The management, everything will be taken care by the private, your own organization. Public cloud is like AWS. This is common, right? AWS is providing the services. Anyone from the world they just register an account and they can use the services. So it's like your data is being managed by AWS now here. This is the example of public cloud. Private cloud means your own servers. Public cloud means some other servers, you will be paying rent for them to use that. And coming to hybrid cloud, let's say you're already having a VMware servers where all your production grade applications are running. And you are already having 2 offices for that one. And your CTO thought to move to cloud now. So in that case, simply in a day, you cannot simply go to public cloud, because already you are having applications running from past decade running on your cloud. In that case, what they will do is, instead of completely moving to the cloud, they will create a network called as AWS gateways. Actually, I will explain in the course. So they will, whatever the new servers or new applications they are creating, they will be creating in the AWS, but they will provide a link to your corporate level network also, so that your corporate data center networks and the machines you are creating in the AWS, both are interconnected now. So your data is both in your private cloud now, and also in your and also in the public cloud, and both are linked together. As both are involved, this is called as hybrid cloud. Understood?
Yes.
So examples of that one. Let's say I'm having a product created in PHP or some Python. In Python framework, I have created some from an application using Django. It's a Python based web application. And I'm using databases in Oracle, that is also in my server. Understood? So as the customers are increasing, I don't want to buy a new data center again. And I don't want to remove this data center also. So now what I will do is all the development part and the testing environment, because whenever an application is released, it won't directly release to the customer. That application is being tested by the internal team, and they will fix any bugs, and it will be demonstrated to the sales people and the pre-sales people, support people, CTOs, everyone. And when that particular feature is completely satisfied by all the internal members, that will be delivered to the end customers. So all this internal process, what I can do is I can do it in my own data centers, but the production grade, the final application, I can deploy it to the AWS. I can manage like this also. So in the pipeline of DevOps, all the development pipelines, testing pipelines will be running in my data center. The final release pipeline, I will publish it to AWS. That is one kind of scenario. How people will follow in the hybrid cloud. In public cloud, everything will be on the AWS. Understood? So let's go to the characteristics of cloud computing. Yeah, these I think I already explained this. One is on-demand service. You can spin up a cluster whenever you want in minutes or seconds. You don't need to go to the vendor, buy them, wait for them to install and deploy them, which will take 1 month to 10 days. But here on demand, within seconds, you can deploy a complete cluster. And broad network access. you don't need to worry about the internet connection, server speed and all. Everything is managed by AWS. And multi-tenancy. What is multi-tenancy is, if you are having multiple customers, the security and everything also will be maintained here. And even for AWS, you are just one of the customer, right? So the same internally, they are having their own data centers of a building or 2 buildings or 3 buildings like that. They can't simply allocate a complete data center for you just for your one mission, right? They will be using the same data centers with multiple customers. But internally, they will manage the security so that other customers won't access your data. That security is being maintained by them by using this multi-tenancy. Understood? If you are more worried about security, they are having one more option that is called as dedicated server. You don't need to, that complete server is provided to you only on demand. They won't link any other customer for you, but further billing will be more. I will show you while creating the mission. And elasticity and scalability. So say if you are using a traditional thing, even though as the number of customers are increasing for a festival offer, you simply grab one new data center and started working using that one. But once the festival is completed, for maintaining the current traffic, one data center is enough. You don't need the second data center. In that case, that is waste of money, right? But in case of AWS, you can simply cancel the lease and you can return back the new data center back to them. That option is called as elasticity. It's like elastic rubber. You can expand it and contract it. That's what they meant to say. And scalability term is increasing the number of servers and also and the scalability, it is both horizontal and vertical. Vertical means increasing the RAM and storage and CPU processing of your single server. Horizontal scalability means your server configuration will be same, but you are increasing the number of servers. Instead of in the first case, you are increasing the RAM from 8 GB to 32 GB. But in the second case, I am using the same 8 GB system now, but I'm adding more servers here. 2-3 machines I'm adding here now. That is called as horizontal scalability. Both are supported in AWS. And everything you are using, that complete usage and everything will be clearly visible in your billing dashboard, so that you will pay only for the things you used. And and as you are using pay as you go, it means whenever there is a increase in the business, then only you are increasing the servers, and later as you are decreasing, there is no upfront cost estimation and everything you need to provide to your management. What are the problems solved? Of course, flexibility. You can change the resources from one type of resource to another whenever you want. And cost effectiveness, scalability, elasticity, of course, high availability, because 24/7, whenever there is a network issues and all, AWS will take care of that one. And your team members, you don't need to worry about the infrastructure as it is managed by AWS. So you simply need to keep 1 or 2 members for managing this AWS, and remaining team can be completely involved in the development activities. Okay. Till now, I have shown you what are the different types of cloud environments. Now I will tell you what are the different types of cloud services we are providing in AWS. Okay. So these are the most common terms. I don't want to explain you in a theoretical manner. I will just explain you in the practical, in an example wise. Infrastructure as a service. In infrastructure as a service, they will be provide you with the servers, networks, and all. It means they are giving you the bare metal servers with you, like an operating system, a Windows operating system or Linux operating system like that. Once the server is provided to you, which application to be installed and what need to be configured is our headache. Understood? They are just providing us one server to us. So That is infrastructure as a service. Coming to platform as a service, here that is one step ahead. Instead of providing the infrastructure on top of the server, they will be installing some development environment also. Let's say you are a Java developer. If you just provided with a server, the Java installation, Eclipse installation, everything should be maintained by you. If they provide a platform as a service, the Eclipse, everything will be provided by them only directly. You'll be directly accessing your Eclipse environment and you can start coding for that one. That is one example I told. You don't need to manage the underlying infrastructure here. And coming to software as a service, here they are not providing the platform also. They are giving you the complete developed product. You are directly using that product, not even the development. It's example like Gmail. You are not spinning up any, you are writing any code there. You are directly using the Gmail application to read your emails, or Dropbox for copying the files, or even Zoom, which you are using for hosting this class. So it can be visualized like this. In on-premises, everything will be managed by us. In infrastructure, these services will be managed by us. Once they provide the server to us, the OS installation and everything will be taken care by us. And in platform as a service, a step more. Only the data and application installation will be taken care. The runtime and everything will be provided by them only. And in the software as a service, everything will be managed by us only. I mean, by them only. Complete the ready-made application, they will be provided to us. And I will tell you what is this virtualization. Now, you see, when you buy a laptop like Dell or HP, you will be provided a laptop, and you can the OS installation will be done by you. So there is one physical machine, the machine is provided to you, and you are installing operating system on top of that, right? OS. Let me explain you, because this is the most common term. This is the Dell laptop I purchased, or server. I mean the workstation or desktop. Once it is purchased, I will install Windows operating system on top of that. Let's say Windows 10. On top of this Windows 10, what I will do is I will install whatever application I want. I can install a VLC player, or I can install a MS Office, or I will install a Tomcat server, whichever I want. Understood? So like this, let's say I have installed my application is, I have installed Python and my Django application also there. Everything is fine. So now I want to test from a different server whether this product is working or not, or for testing purpose I need one more. The traditional approach is, again I need to purchase another laptop, again I need to turn Windows 10, and again I need to install Windows operating all the softwares, my Python application for that one. Instead, what I can do is, there are softwares like there are set of softwares called hypervisors. What they will do is they will add one more layer on top of this, like my Windows 10 is installed. Understood? On top of this, I will install one more software called as hypervisor. On this, once this hypervisor is installed as a normal application, like how you are installing this VLC, Tomcat and all, I just installed hypervisor as another software. Once this hypervisor is installed, what it will do is it will provide me a complete cluster environment. So on top of this hypervisor, I can install multiple operating systems. I can install Win7. I can install Win10. I can install Linux or Ubuntu, like that. So in the background, when for us as an end user, this is normal operating system only. However, you are using this direct Windows 10 installed on your laptop, you will use the same way this one also. But internal, that network communication, the storage access and everything will be taken care by this hypervisor software. And all the hardware interactions, it will be passed back to the original operating system. And this one will send it back to the hardware calls and all. So whenever it need to access a webcam on this Windows 7 machine, what it will do is I will send this, we will just try to access the webcam here. That request internally, this hypervisor will take care and it will use the webcam of the software. Understood? I mean, this Dell laptop hardware directly. So this hypervisor is acting as a mediator in the middle, but for the end user, these are treated as a direct machines. As these are not directly installed on my laptop, these are termed as virtual machines because these are not real machines, right? So these are called as virtual machines. And this one is called as physical machine or host. Understood? An example of this hypervisor software is VirtualBox from Oracle, Hyper-V from Microsoft, VMware Workstation from VMware. VMware have one more product called as VMware ESXi. There what they will do is, here in this VirtualBox or VMware Workstation, I need a physical operating system already installed like Windows 10. And on top of that, I need to install this hypervisor. But for VMware ESXi, they are packing this operating system also as a VMware Linux OS plus ESXi software, so that you don't need this physical machine directly. Directly on this hardware, you will install this operating system, Linux plus ESXi software, and your team members will directly access that using a website launched by this ESXi software. You will simply type this Linux server IP address in the URL, and it will show all the machines for you. Understood? So that is the software provided by VMware. So AWS EC2 instances internally using the same concept. They are having different data centers, these physical hardwares, and on top of that one, they are installing these hypervisors. An example of that is VirtualBox, right? For your visualization. See, I have installed Windows 10, Ubuntu, everything on top of them. Understood? Example. This complete operating system is seen in a window like this. You can directly interact with them. You can install Windows 10 or whatever you want. I just installed a Linux operating system called Bodhi Linux. So AWS internally uses the same technology, not VirtualBox, but a Linux environment. And whenever you purchase an EC2 instance, what they are doing is they are sending you connection details of this machine, a virtual machine created in their environment. Understood? The same way. So far, any doubts, guys, regarding this virtualization?
No, sir.
Okay. So this virtualization layer also, when they are creating an infrastructure as a service, till this virtualization layer, they are taking the part. And when we asked for some Windows 10 OS, they are creating an operating system and giving to us. So that's why from this layer, it's managed by us in the infrastructure as a service once the OS is installed. Yeah. So coming to AWS, it's a very big company. It's being used all over the world. So that's why they are having data centers complete world. So I will show you the picturization of their data centers. You can see here on different countries and all over the world. In the North American region, they're having different data centers. So each AWS internally, logically, they have divided these complete geographical areas into regions. Understood? So the region names also provided as provided with these symbols: US East 1, EU East 3, like that. US East 1 means that North American region, like that. So Asia Pacific comes under this China, Australia, India, and all. South American regions here, Europe regions. So in the region wise, they divided. So let's say all your customers are from North America. You can take from US East 1, so that the servers also will be nearer to them. The network traffic and everything will be more. Instead of hosting the server in some India, you can deploy there directly. And each region internally divided into availability zones. Let's say there is a data center, there is a region provided in North America, let's say some in some city or in some state. What they will do is, again, they will split that region into multiple availability zones. So all those availability zones will be interconnected. You can see US East 1. Internally, it is divided to US East 1A, US East 1B, US East 1C, like that. So all these availability zones you can consider as different branches in the same city or different branches in the same state. But all those branches are network connected with virtual private networks with one another. Understood? So if one of the availability zone, due to any earthquakes or tornadoes or tsunamis or anything, if it is down, at least other regions will be, other availability zones will be available in that region to provide service to the customers. Understood? And in each data center, let's say US East 2A is one data center in Gachibowli, Hyderabad. What it will do is, I mean, an availability zone in Gachibowli, Hyderabad. So this availability zone, again, let's say Hyderabad, in Hyderabad, Gachibowli area. In that one, again, it doesn't need to be all in the same place, same room. They might be, this availability zone will be having multiple data centers in different offices or in the same building in different, different floors, or in the same area in the different buildings. But all those are interconnected. Understood? Those are data centers. But this data center division, they won't show to us. The user permissibility to see them is only till this availability zone. You can, once you select US East 1, you can select you want the traffic to be in 1A or 1B or 1C. But you cannot decide on which data center you need to pick. It will be taken care by them. They won't expose us to us. What is edge locations? Let's say you hosted a website, a static website. You can say that one, actually, you are hosting in S3 storage service. So some customers are using in North America, and some people are trying to use from Australia also. So your server is in North America, but every time a customer from Australia tries to access your server, it will send the request to complete the world to your server directly. So instead of that, what AWS will do is, they are having these points, locations called as edge locations, where whenever there is an intercontinental or inter-regional traffic is being sent, if it is static, like static web pages, images are like that, S3 are like that, what they will do is, they will maintain one local cache in the edge location. So when you try to access that particular image to download from North America server, it will first check in the local edge location, whether someone is already downloaded that. If someone is already downloaded that, it will send a copy from that edge location. If it is not there, it will send to that main server. In that way, that network routing is minimized here. Okay. Any doubts here so far, guys?
No, sir.
Okay. And coming to AWS services, it is having around 200 to 300 services, and some are being added every year and some are being removed as upgraded ones are being coming. So in this course, I will be covering you some 40 services around. And let's say some other service is being added, you should not come and take again any course. You should try to evaluate that yourself. So that kind of approach and researching ability, I will explain you in the course, that one also, so that you don't need to go for a training again. So after these 40 services and what is the approach we need to follow, how to troubleshoot that and all. If some new service of Amazon, if you want to utilize, you can simply go to the AWS documentation and you can see that one and you can utilize that. That kind of approachability I will explain you. So, and coming to AWS services, there are two different types of services. One is global services. Global services means these are not specific to any region. Region services means these are specific to region. Let's say you have created a EC2 machine, a Linux machine on North American region. That one will be created in the North American clusters, North American data centers, like that. Suddenly you cannot move that to Mumbai servers. Understood? If you want to create a new Mumbai server, you need to back up the data from that one, create an image from that one, and you need to spin up a new one. You cannot simply move that one from here to here, because that is a region specific service that will be accessible only in that region. Of course, you can access that machine from Mumbai, but that server cannot be moved to Amazon data center in Mumbai. That will be available there only. Understood? So such kind of regional services are EC2, Beanstalk. Lambda is a programming interface, serverless programming, and Rekognition is a service provided by Amazon for machine learning. So these are regional specific one. There are global services like IAM. Like IAM is used for creating policies and creating users and all. These are global services. When you are creating an IAM user, that will be available for all the servers. That is not specific to any region. Understood? So even when you log into AWS portal, when you are creating IAM, it won't ask for the region. But when you are creating an EC2 instance, it will ask for which region you are going to create. Understood? And CloudFront. CloudFront is a content delivery network, mainly used for hosting the static websites, like just HTML pages and all. If it involved a programming level websites like Python and all, CloudFront is not useful. Only for front-end and static website it is, and web application firewall. These are some kind of global services hosted by AWS. So one more thing, for this course, actually you need to create an account in AWS. So while you are creating an account, you need to register from this link. So it will directly go to free tier account. So when you register from this link, or you can simply search in the Google for AWS free tier account, you will get a 1 year free account, where in this 1 year, you will be having 720 hours. Like you can spin up a machine and you can keep it completely on for 720 hours. That kind of a level of features they are providing you to for free. But you need to check whichever service you are taking, whether that comes under free tier or not. So whenever you are creating any mission or anything from AWS, it will show you whether it is eligible for free tier or not whenever you are creating. So you can go to this link and see what are the services available in the free tier. They are continuously adding new services and removing some old also. So it is best link to go to this website to see what are the services available for free. So this is the free tier services. You can see Amazon EC2 for 750 hours, an S3 account for 5 GB storage, RDS for 750 hours, either of them, not both. Understood? So if you spin up a virtual machine and you are running it parallelly, and if you want to use RDS also, then you will get only half of them. So it's like you need to see exactly how much eligibility is there. And to be cautious about that one, there is a billing dashboard in AWS there you can set alerts. So I will show you that also in the next class. Once a free account is created, I will show you where you can set the billing alert. Generally, I used to keep $1 so that even that free limit is exceeded, it won't cross that $1. Once that $1 limit is reached, it will give me a caution. It will give me a notification that $1 is reached. Do you want to resume or stop the services like that? So in that case, even if you cross that free zone, you won't cross the 70 rupees or 80 rupees like that. If you don't keep the alert, suddenly someday you'll get some 10,000 or 20,000 bill for the month. Understood? So that is all. Even for certification also, you will be doing in the same website. Understood? 1 minute. Okay. So how to create the account and all, I will explain you in the next class. So if time permits, I will explain more. But I assume I already took around 1.5 hour time of you guys. So any doubts so far, guys?
No, sir.
I hope you like the demo, and if you have any doubts, you can ping me. And in the next week or like that, I will be starting a demo on DevOps also, where I will be explaining different tools of DevOps. Mostly, unlike in many of the courses in DevOps, they will just cover the Docker and all. But in my course, I will be providing you Kubernetes also as part of this DevOps course, because most of the applications now moving from traditional web servers to Kubernetes and all. And coming to this AWS course, we will be hosting a Kubernetes environment also in AWS called as EKS. That is one service that I think that is not included in the course brochure, but I will explain you that also. But I will show you the basic from the administrator point of view, not from a DevOps point of view. From the administrator point of view, I'll explain how to spin up that cluster, how to manage the containers and all. And for that, you need some basic knowledge on Docker and Kubernetes. So I will take 1 hour session for that also. Don't worry. That will be from my end. And one more thing, these institute guys, they want to explain you about their application for raising your queries and all. 1 minute, I will just contact them. She'll be joining this meeting. 1 minute. I will stop the screen share. Yeah. So of course it is 1 hour session only, but today as a demonstration, I just want to cover all the topics and all. So it took a bit more time. Can't hear anything. One minute. Just stay on, I'll call her. Are you guys able to hear her? Or only me having the audio problem?
No, sir, we can't able to hear her.
Yeah. 1 minute. Still. Okay, guys, I think there is some problem with them. You can provide the feedback to them if you are interested in this course.
Okay.
And related to the DevOps, we are planning a demo mostly in the next week. You can contact for that also. And I forgot to tell you guys this one point. Coming to this AWS administrator and DevOps roles, if you go to a companies like TCS, Infosys, or at the companies where the team members are more, there will be a dedicated guys for AWS, called as AWS administrators. And if you go to startups or in the same companies with smaller teams, they are expecting guys with both AWS admin knowledge, who will be managing AWS, and also who will be working on DevOps also. And in some companies, they will be expecting the development knowledge also. So it will be an added advantage for you guys if you both take the courses, but that is your mark. Okay. There are many companies, they just need a AWS admin course. So
Okay.
what my suggestion is, go with AWS, join any company. Once you join any company and started working in AWS, slowly you can learn DevOps tools on your own also, if you don't want to pay for both the courses. Okay, that's it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.